This is listener-supported community radio, KAAD-LP 103.5 on your FM dial, Sonora, California, and also streaming on www.kaad-lp.org. I'm Wendy Ledger with the Golden Nuggets of the Motherlode, brought to you by the Sonora Writers Group and Tuolumne County Arts. And today, we have the great pleasure of having Katie Stine with us. Katie has published short stories, poems, and nonfiction in small presses and online. She obtained a dual Bachelor of Arts in Creative Writing and in Music from California State University, Hayward, and then obtained her Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from University of Alaska, Anchorage. Her most recent short story, Gregarious, was published in the award-winning magazine Into the Void. Katie has also collaborated with the production company Mad Law Media, writing and starring in a short film, How to Be Sexy. Katie not only dove, but helped with underwater photography during the documentary filming of the world record attempt to dive all 5 Great Lakes in 24 hours, called Big 5 Dive. A recent return to California brought Katie and her family to the foothills. She has lived in the Midwest, Alaska, and the South, giving her ample fuel for writing settings. She is currently working on a historical novel set in the turn of the 20th century North Dakota, as well as a feminist, pugilist, Regency romance series. In addition to her own fiction writing, Katie reviews books for the Historical Novel Writing Society and bakes with her toddler. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Wendy.
So, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was about 9 years old. In 3rd grade, I had a teacher, Mrs. Canavan, and she would have us write short stories. Of course, all of them were terrible, but she encouraged us to do it nonetheless. And then when I was in 4th grade, there was a rainy day, and we, of course, were all inside for recess, and I wrote the first in what became known as the Junior series, which was about Junior the mosquito. And so we wrote those from 4th grade to 6th grade and had a couple of my friends that we then made little handmade, hand-drawn books and sold them for 10 cents each to our classmates.
That's so wonderful. So was the mosquito like a talking mosquito, or was it about children characters with the mosquito?
No, it was a talking mosquito named Junior, and his family. He had a sister named Sally and their pets, a gnat, which was a cat, and I forget what the dog equivalent was, but, you know, it was a very sort of Simpsons-esque, you know, Simpsons had just come out.
Yes.
So that's how old I am. And so it was really just sort of a sitcom-ish kind of thing. And so each book was its own little episode. And Junior had a crush on Sally Be Cute, who was a girl mosquito. And then his sister, Kelly, that's right. Kelly was the little sister, which I'm now realizing is really strange because we had 3 Kellys also in that class. So I don't know if that was, but anyway, yeah.
So you told me a little bit about this earlier, and you had said that you also designed like accessories.
Yeah. Well, because what series could be complete without merchandising? And so we made earrings out of, it was called Fimo. It's this type of sculpting clay that you then fired into an oven. And so we made earrings and bracelets. And one of our friends, Camille, she could make these tiny little origami pianos. And because Kelly, the little sister, played piano.
Yeah.
So, so she had the little tiny pianos that you could buy. I made puffy paint t-shirts.
Wow.
Yeah. It was quite an empire.
Yeah. So at an early age, you were not only writing, you were also like venturing into the world of marketing.
Yes. You know, entrepreneurship. Yes.
So wonderful. So I always think that an important part of being a writer is reading. So I was wondering, who are your favorite authors and why?
Yeah. Oh man, I have so many, and I read a lot. All-time favorite writer, probably Margaret Atwood. She and the reason why I think Margaret Atwood is because she is the person who writes science fiction and no one notices that it's science fiction.
It's true.
And she's never shelved. I worked in several bookstores. She's never shelved in science fiction. She is not relegated to a genre. She is mainstream literary. She's won the Booker Prize twice now. She's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize a number of times as well. And no one notices that it happens to be science fiction, which is amazing. So she wrote Oryx and Crake, which was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. And it's post-apocalyptic fiction. The main character's name is Snowman, or at least that's the name he gives himself. And it is a love triangle. That's what it's a post-apocalyptic love triangle with strange mutated creatures roaming the earth. And it got shortlisted for one of the most amazing literary prizes in the world. So, I mean, you can't help but admire that. So in terms of classic authors that are my favorite, Edith Wharton is one of my all-time favorites. She also won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, in 1919. I might be getting that wrong. It might be 1920. So she wrote books that were mostly about the upper class in the U.S. She wrote a lot about women's issues and the issues that the issues that upper class women face, which is to say that it's different from what women who aren't rich face, because women who aren't rich face all different kinds of problems other than just who's got the most money that I want to marry.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Some different issues. But, one of her short stories, not short stories, one of her novels, Custom of the Country, was about a skewering of that. The main character, Undine, which is the name of a nymph, and she's basically a horrible person. And all she is searching for is social status. And so she marries man after man after man, divorcing, which of course is a bad thing to do, but she manages to get away with it until finally she reaches her pinnacle husband, and then he cannot be considered for the ambassadorship because she's been divorced. And so it is finally her ambition that, hamstrings her in the end. A bit of a satire there, I guess. But
yeah, that sounds wonderful. I've never read Edith Wharton, so now that's on my list.
Well, everyone thinks of her from Ethan Frome, which is like the most depressing book known to man. So
I really like Edith Frome. I think that's the only one I've read. So I know that you're currently working on a historical novel, Square Grand.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk about why you wanted to write a historical novel and what are the joys and the challenges of writing in that genre?
Yeah. So I encountered this very strange factoid at one point, and I really wanted to write a novel about it and couldn't really figure out where to go. And I've spent, 15 years wandering around this factoid. And that factoid is that in 1903, there was a conflagration, is what they called it, a burning of square grand pianos in Atlantic City. On the beach. I know. Wow. So square grand pianos are a specific type of grand piano that fit into a corner. That was why they were made that way, as opposed to a square, as opposed to a regular grand piano that has the curve that normal pianos that you think of, there's always a lounge singer laying on one of them.
Right. Yeah.
But this kind is square and it fits into a corner. So they're very, very popular. However, they're also incredibly hard to tune. So the Piano Tuners Society, I guess you could call it, they came up with a campaign to try to get those replaced so they didn't have to break their backs dealing with this tuning problem. And so they got about 200 of them shipped to them in New Jersey. And at their convention, they burned them all.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So you found that moment. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just really curious about how you conduct your research. Like, how do you go from there?
Well, fortunately, I did have a very good friend, Megan Tierney, who helped me with my research. She was going through her PhD program at Emory and helped me look up articles through her venues. So I do have a copy of the original newsletter from the Piano Tuners Association of America calling for these pianos. It's really, I mean, it's 1903. It's this wonderful sort of yellow journalistic journalism sort of style to it, which is fantastic. And then I also contacted the national, the the Historical Society.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I also contacted the Historical Society of the county I was writing about,
right.
a fictionalized county.
Right.
But they were very helpful, wonderful. Becky was her name, who helped me out a bunch. And she sent me actual newspaper clippings from the town. And so, again, I actually used some of it in my book. Again, the kind of journalism that is so colorful.
Yeah,
and
the language they use, the elevated tone of the words.
Well, not even elevated. Well, maybe it was because this is North Dakota and it's in, so it's part of the West. They still have this really frontier feel to them. So it is, there's a stagecoach robbery that happens during my time period. So of course I have to put that in there. And the original article is just so wonderful. I couldn't not quote it because it goes through and it's point by point where the guy who's driving the stagecoach, his name is Dad. So Dad Barry, and these two bad guys come up on him and they pull their guns, and he even says, and Dad Barry says, and then whatever it was that he said, some snappy remark. And it's just wonderful. So a lot of it is just the primary sources can really sometimes just be way more fun than what you thought they would be.
Yeah. So help me with this connection. Yeah. So the book is set in North Dakota.
Yes.
But this event took place in Atlantic City. Was this like a nationwide call for square pianos?
It was, yes. So I also kind of wanted to write about where I'm from. So I originally was born in Valley City, North Dakota, which is where my dad was from and my dad's side of the family. So I spent the first 8 years of my life there. And it was a very idyllic sort of childhood. It was wonderful. And I wanted to write about it because I feel like everyone thinks about North Dakota as this barren wasteland. And sometimes it is. If you've ever been caught in a blizzard there, yes. But other times it's not. And summer is a beautiful time there. And it really depended on the perspective. And so I wanted to get these outsiders that come. And my book is mostly a grouping of outsiders that for various different reasons coming together, and some fit in and some don't, and how the landscape of North Dakota is so I'm going to say something that's completely contradictory here, but so subtly overwhelming. Because it does creep in on you and you don't realize how affected you are. My time in Alaska really showed me how much landscape is really important to shaping who you are and how you react to things. And in Alaska, the weather's going to get you.
Right.
So you need to figure out your coping strategy because it's not going to change for you. So
exactly.
The dark is the dark, the cold is the cold. And I wasn't old enough in North Dakota to really come to those conclusions.
Right.
And because North Dakota is flat and it doesn't have the mountains, it doesn't seem as big and overwhelming as Alaska can seem. And so I wanted to show how for some people that makes them, and for other people it breaks them. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the same time, you're also writing this feminist, pugilist, Regency romance.
Which is a mouthful.
Yes. But it's such an intriguing mouthful. Like how did you come up with this?
So I had decided several years ago that because I was having trouble pacing my novel Square Grand, and NaNoWriMo was coming up, National November Novel Writing Month. And I decided that I wanted to write a romance novel. But stuck in the throes of history as I am, I thought, well, why don't I just write a historical romance novel? And of course, the most popular historical romance time period is the Regency time period. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I started doing some, research on the internet. And because it was just supposed to be this November project. It wasn't supposed to go anywhere. And actually the one I wrote for that time period, I ended up scrapping because I didn't know enough about the time period and it was horribly inaccurate. But it did show me the places I needed to look to find what I eventually stumbled upon, which was women's boxing.
Yes.
And the idea that, especially to contrast that with the traditional Regency romances, where they are about manners and they are about decorum and they are about these very genteel structures, it was also reinforcing this idea that women were not physical. And it hasn't been until pretty recently that women have been allowed and celebrated by their physicality. I'm thinking of the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, who was almost pushed off the course. And that was, I think, the late 60s, maybe early 70s. I don't quite remember. And, you know, we're talking now about the women's soccer team demanding equal pay. Because they are far more successful than the male soccer team. Right. You know, and we have all these things that are starting to gain traction for women and their physicality and their ability to perform sports. And I didn't ever mean to write a sports novel, but it was important to show women taking action rather than women talking and being understanding, which I'm not to say that women don't talk and aren't understanding. That's fine that they are. And I don't mean anything against that, but really, I was a little tired of reading a romance novel where the man was brooding and awful and rude, and everyone was just like, oh, well, he's just tormented. And then the heroine come along and she's 4'9" and, you know, 30 pounds when soaking wet, and she would cure him through her love. And I was just kind of over that trope. And so I wanted to turn it on its head, and where we have a brooding heroine who needs someone to love her because she is doing the things, because she is taking action, because she is fighting against the cage that she knows that she's in. Mm-hmm. And she has everything. So she should be fine. She should shut her mouth and accept her lot in life, which is a very good lot. You know, she is an aristocrat. She is wealthy. She has everything she could ever want. So why should she rattle anything? And the hero of the story, John Arthur, is a prize fighter. And I did model him on a couple of different actual prize fighters of the time. And because he's had a very violent upbringing, that he understands that action doesn't always work. Sometimes you need words. And so I feel like those two together create something and give something to each other. And so that's the romance in there.
Yeah. So did you follow boxing at all before you started writing these books?
Vaguely, just I think like anybody who is mildly interested in something, I would watch if there was a prize fight on. But once I started reading about the history of boxing, then I became much more interested. So I did watch some prize fights after that. And of course, MMA is always on TV. So that was easy to watch. You don't have to generally pay-per-view on that kind of thing. Yeah. And then I did start boxing.
You
myself. Did? Yes, I did.
What has that been like?
Well, there is nothing quite like being a 37-year-old woman to walk into a really sketchy looking gym in a really not great part of the neighborhood and say, I would like to start boxing, please. It was very nice. And my coach, Stephen Bass of Savannah Combat Club, was very kind to let me show up day after day after day. And so it was nice. Met some very lovely people that I really enjoyed working with, and some other women. Of course, I was the oldest person in there, mm-hmm. which was a little intimidating,
right?
To walk in and be the older than your coach and wanting to do this physical thing. So, I mean, I'd always been a runner, and so it wasn't like I didn't have a background in that sort of physical world, but I was not a person that engaged with other people. All of my sports were very solo sorts of ventures. So to stand there and say, okay, hit me, I was like, oh, that's weird. So, but yeah, it was really nice to know how that felt in my shoulders and everything, so that when I was writing an actual fight, I had the notes from Pierce Egan, who was the sports writer in 1811 to about 1830. He wrote a series called Boxiana, and he chronicled all the fights, and he was the sort of Madden of his day. So he's got his own vocabulary. It's very colorful. And so he was doing all those. And so it was nice to be able to read that and know, like, instinctively inside my body what that must have felt like for the fighter that's doing this, throwing this combination or whatnot. So it was a good experience to have. And it was a good experience just to see and learn where that motion comes from in your own body.
Yeah, so. I think that's important for writing when you can do it, or when you're inspired to do that kind of thing. When I read a book about a certain subject comes in, it seems pretty clear to me sometimes if a writer has like firsthand knowledge of it or whether they don't. Yeah.
But we'll see what people think about this.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. So, just the last question, can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Like, you have all these projects going on right now. Like, how do you manage it? How do you schedule things?
I do have to concentrate on one and then the other, because I can't really switch between Regency England, which is, my time period at 1816. So it's really hard to go from London 1816 to North Dakota 1899.
Yeah,
that's
slightly different.
That's a big jump. So, like this summer, I did some research and visited Fort Berthold, which is an Indian reservation for the 3 affiliated tribes. One of the tribes is Mandan, and one of my characters in my book is a Mandan woman. So I went up there and visited there, had a wonderful time up there. So everyone was so nice. I got to, just meet everybody and chat with everyone. And I went to the community level powwow. It wasn't a big multi-tribe powwow, but it was just really wonderful to see everyone and meet everyone and talk and hear stories, and that was very helpful. And so then I had done a lot of rewrites on that, sent it out to beta readers when I got back,
right.
After I did all of those weeks of edits and everything. So in waiting to hear back from them, I turned to Lady's Revenge and got back into this and realized that I really did just want to get this series out and going. So I am self-publishing this one. And the series will be self-published, which in the romance world is a pretty easy thing to do.
Yes.
With historical literary fiction like Square Grand, it doesn't sell as well without the backing of something larger. And so I am going to try to get that submitted to some university presses after I get Lady's Revenge out. And then, of course, the next book after Lady's Revenge, The Boxer and the Blacksmith, is a continuation of this series. And I'm hoping to get that one out in summer.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the rough draft is about 3/4 of the way done. We'll see how long it takes me to clean that one up and finish. So that's the plan.
That sounds great. So would you like to read a little bit from your work? We'd love to hear it.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple things you need to know. This excerpt is starting a few chapters in. So the characters have already met a couple of times. They were at the same dinner this night. So hopefully this is pretty self-explanatory. Oh, and the lady's fighter is named Bess, and she comes into this as well.
Okay.
John walked into the crowd. The ring was marked out by lazy ropes on the floor, men crowding the lines. Typically, the ladies' fight was first, but some young amateurs must have taken the opening slot. Ladies' fights worked the crowd into a frenzy. Bess was nowhere to be seen. John pushed through the mob of people. The mill was still going. None of the men wanted to let him pass, so he elbowed the best he could. Before he knew it, he was face to face with Vasily, whose meaty, folded arms gave no unsure impression of his feelings. "Hello, old friend," John said, restoring his aristocratic dialect. Lady Lydia peered around the mountain of a man, surprise writ across her face. Her hood was still up and masking those who might try to recognize her, but anyone who knew Vasily would spot her instantly. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes trailed down to his undone cravat and partially unbuttoned shirt. He'd fight bare-chested, but the first ceremony of any match was peeling off the garments. The room was already hot with anticipation of blood. "I should ask you the same. This is no place for a lady," he said. "Are you part of the fancy?" His eyes flicked to the big man. The crowd erupted, and John didn't need to look at the ring to know that one of the fighters was knocked out. Money would be changing hands soon, the ring would be cleared, and the next match would be set. Lady Lydia glanced to the ring and back to him. People elbowed past, everyone wanting the best vantage point. She was uncomfortable with him, that much was clear, but she didn't seem to be bothered by the jostling masses. She seemed the type to abhor this crush of this sweaty basement, but here she was, at ease with them and not with him. "Should you need any further assistance," he said, glancing at the pony-sized driver, "I am at your disposal. However, I have a pressing matter in just a few minutes." "You took a fight on the same night as our invitation to dine?" She seemed insulted. Should she be insulted? He fought every night he could, and the invitation was issued days before he knew of the night of the fight. It was the only way they could keep ahead of the magistrates. A prize fighter must fight, that's in the name, is it not? So what good would I be if I turned down such invitations, whether to dine or to bleed? "That's a pretty speech for a half-dressed man," she countered. "You should hear my speeches when I'm thoroughly undressed," he said, flashing a smile that he was almost certain would earn him a backhand from her driver. "I'm not certain I could stand it," she said, not batting an eye. He took a step forward, not thinking, just wanting to engage her further, smell her hair somehow. Oranges and vanilla would be a far sight better than the stink of unwashed men. But Vasily wedged his foot between John's and hers. He retreated, and Vasily gave a grunt of approval. "I would be happy to push your limits," he said, bowing as best he could amongst the crowd. "Fine man is what you got," he heard from beside him. He straightened to see Bess Abbott standing there, hands on hips, towering over Lady Lydia and damn near looking the Russian bear in the eye. "Bess!" He clapped his hand on her shoulder and shook her hand with the other. "John," she said, grinning. "Like the old days, right? Me on first, then you bringing in the crowd for the crimson end?" "Nothing like old mates," he said, his accent shifting again. He glanced past Vasily's meat barrier to Lady Lydia, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. What better time to scandalize the high-born than when they went slumming? "Lady Lydia, may I present my old friend, Bess Abbott," he said, returning to his proper accent. Lady Lydia bowed her head. "Bess," she said, with no trace of hauteur or dismay. Wasn't that a fine thing, then? What was she doing here? And why wasn't she appalled that he'd called her name and introduced her to a lady fighter? In fact, why had she addressed Bess with her Christian name? "My lady," Bess said, giving an approximation of a curtsy. She was quick on her feet, Bess was, but she didn't possess the finest manners. Once, when they were both younger, she'd been clocked with a quarterstaff so hard at the end of the mill she couldn't speak right for a week. The blow had ended the match, of course, and everyone agreed that she was lucky to keep most of her teeth. Since then, Bess didn't like to duck her head to anyone, and she refused to limit her field of vision. A warning bell rang. "I'm to my corner," Bess said. "Good luck, mate," John said, clapping her on the shoulder again. "Don't need it," she said, grinning, "but maybe you do." Bess gave another approximation of a curtsy and then pushed her way through the crowd, shouting obscenities when someone took a drunken swing at her. "If you're going to try to embarrass me, you'll have to try harder," Lady Lydia said, turning from him. "If you'll excuse me, the match is soon to start. I'd hate to miss it." "I dare say it'll scandalize you, my lady. The fairer sex is not so gentle." Her eyes flashed back at him, anger enhancing her beauty. The color in her cheeks he'd admired at dinner finally returned. "Finally, we agree on one thing at least." Then she flicked her hand at him, dismissing him. His temper, usually so controlled, flared at her gesture. He was no footman at her beck and call. He cracked his neck, first left, then right, then left again. The bell rung and the match was starting, so he left, elbowing his way back through the crowd. Tony's ample pockets were stuffed with notes, and he was grinning like a jackal. "Bess is my girl," he crowed. "You wish," John said, elbowing Tony in the ribs. "Watch it. Those elbows are deadly weapons." And they stared out at the ring companionably for a moment, words unnecessary for men like the two of them who'd shared the rough life. "That tart over there get you all worked up?" Tony asked, his eyes never wavering from the center of the room. The women had their bottlemen undo their loose stays and take away the garment. The crowd whistled. Bess's opponent, an older woman he'd not seen before, shook her rump at the crowd, egging them on. "Take it off!" someone yelled. And Bess didn't respond, didn't waggle for the crowd. She was focused on her opponent, while the other one was focused on the crowd. It would be her dominoes he'd step on in the ring then.
Thank you so much, Katie Stine, for joining us today. This is Wendy Ledger with the Golden Nuggets of the Motherlode, brought to you by the Sonora Writers Group and Tuolumne County Arts. And this is listener-supported community radio KAAD-LP 103.5 on your FM dial, Sonora, California, and also streaming on www.kaad-lp.org.